Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Talking Point. My name is Fahraaz Patel. It's the first episode of this year, so it's a great pleasure to have you on our screens. And of course, it is a year where we are looking ahead to the national elections happening in South Africa. So a lot of the focus on Talking Point is going to be looking ahead to those elections that, with a date yet to be announced by the presidency. Now, one of the new parties that will be contesting the space is Rise Mzansi. Of course, do remember they did launch last year, and we had Tebogo Moalusi, who came in just after the party had launched. So we decided, with their manifesto launch happening this weekend, let's bring them back into the studio. So it gives me great pleasure in welcoming Tebogo Moalusi. Tebogo, good day. Thank you so much for joining us here on Talking Point on Hilaal TV.
Good day, and thank you for having us again. What a pleasure to be here.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Tebogo, before we start off with, of course, looking ahead to the manifesto, big news that happened yesterday. Kome Ramolifo, of course, leaving the DA after close to nearly over 2 decades, joining Rise Mzansi. You look at his portfolio, you look at what he brings in terms of the service he's done with Gauteng. It's a big coup for you guys, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, part of the journey for Rise Mzansi has always been finding the best to lead. And there's no substitute for experience. You know, I think as a new organization, as a new political party, there's a lot to learn. And part of bolstering our leadership collective is making sure that we are able to attract talent from all walks of life. He has got great credentials and a good track record within the political space, and we are really happy to have him as part of the team. As the Gauteng convener, obviously, I'll be working very closely with him. He's got deep experience in understanding the issues around education, for example. We know that kids are going back to school today, and we already know that there's some teething problems that need some serious addressing. So working with him, we can really put a spotlight on some of the issues that pertain to education. But over and above that, he's a patriot, he's someone who loves the country, who loves the province, and we are very glad to have someone with his caliber and skills on the team.
And of course, the fact that he started off as a youth representative, that just shows that the appeal to the youth is important for a party like Rise Mzansi, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think, you know, when the stats came out last year, the median age in Mzansi at the moment is 28. And so half of the population of South Africa is under the age of 28. We have to take that seriously. We've got a challenge of having a political leadership that's not reflective of those demographics. And him having come through those structures, understanding what it takes to build structures that, serve the youth is important for us, and we'll learn from that. He'll also work with the likes of Lawrence Manaka, who is our head of the youth chapter and the student chapter, in making sure that we can quickly accelerate building that structure so that it can respond to the issues of the youth. The youth must rise. It's their time to really participate in democracy and vote and be part of shaping their future.
Let's look ahead to the manifesto for this weekend. Of course, it occurs, and manifestos generally set the tone for what the party is going to be doing going forward ahead of the elections and post that. When somebody asks the question, so what is the manifesto of Rise Mzansi? What is it?
The Manifesto of Rise Mzansi is a collection of the aspirations of the people of this country. After we launched, we embarked on a series of roadshows, if you recall, where we really traveled the length of breadth of this country in town halls, roundtable discussions, conversations with communities, those in business, civil society, really extracting and listening what are some of the issues that South Africans have, but also how do they reimagine this country to be, and what role do they see themselves playing? And so having had all of these conversations, we then went to the People's Convention, which was hosted in October at Constitution Hill. And that was the first opportunity for us to consolidate some of those conversations and package them in a way that was coherent and that articulates a political program. This now, the People's Manifesto launch, is the natural progression of that entire process. And so The Rise Mzansi manifesto is unique because it truly is from the people. What we have done is really just take the thoughts and the aspirations of South Africans and put them in a single document, but also to set out a plan. Because I think what we've been having a challenge with in this country is a coherent vision,
Yes.
as well as a plan that demonstrates how we will achieve change, but also sustain that change over a period of time.
You speak about obviously that People's Convention that happened in October, Constitutional Hill. I think every South African knows the value of Constitutional Hill and its historic aspect. How important was it that the gathering of thoughts at such an iconic place within not just Johannesburg or Gauteng, but South Africa as a whole, allowed Rise Mzansi to communicate clearly with people to pave a way forward?
We've said that 2024 was a 1994. Last year when we made that statement,
Yes.
the year wasn't 2024. We are now living in that moment. And we stay by that statement. 2024 truly is our 94. And Constitution Hill is a reflection of that exact idea, is that it resembles that is the past and the decisions that we made to transform this country for better. But it's well known that as soon as you step out of your home and you look at the environment that you live in, many people, including ourselves, have not been able to see the true benefits and the dividends of our democracy. And so 2024 gives us an opportunity to reflect, but also to reinvest ourselves in the promise that was put in our preamble of the Constitution. And so, as a physical space, as a resemblance of the past and the future coming together, that is also what Rise Mzansi really resembles. For us, it was also our policy conference. So we called it the People's Convention, but essentially it was a thinking space. We brought civil society, people from all walks of life, from business, to really come and start thinking about how do we deal with the complexity and the intersectionality of the issues that face South Africa. And it was well attended. All 9 provinces were in attendance. We had some dignitaries. And I can say that the outcome, which was the People's Declaration, was really a statement of intent about the country that we want to build, the South Africa that we deserve, that is safe, that is prosperous, that is equal and united in a single generation.
Tebogo, we all often speak about the importance of diversity and how important diversity is, and Rise Mzansi has the diversity. When taking together the diverse and the beautiful diverse culture we have in South Africa and understanding each and every community, that is important, isn't it? Because only then do you understand the struggles on the ground with these respective communities.
Absolutely. I truly believe that diversity is our superpower. The reason other people from countries travel to South Africa and experience South Africa is there is something phenomenal when magic happens and a people comes together. Unfortunately, the current establishment has, kind of bear fruit from separating us and creating factions and creating a reason for us not to be together. And that's why one of our values is solidarity, the ability to see into someone's world, connect with it, empathize with it, and connect with it in a way that is human before anything else. And diversity is not just about paying lip service. If you truly are going to solve for the complexity of this country, you need the multiplicity of voices in the room. I cannot profess to understand how you see the world, but if you are in the room, you can certainly contribute based on what you experience, but also based on the constituencies that you live in, the people that you represent. And by so doing, we really then reflect solutions that can be sustainable.
One final question before we go to the break, Tebogo. Obviously, your leader, Songezo Zibi's, you were telling me just off the air, he's working really hard in really writing the final, drafts of that manifesto. When you have a leadership like him, when you have, other, think tanks around him, it really helps because it's not just about one person putting an idea, it's about multiple people putting an idea. And that's how you chart a way forward in terms of a manifesto, isn't it?
Yes, Songezo's background, over and above his professional experience, is that he's a South African. Yes. He's a South African that was born in Mkanduli, which is a town in the Eastern Cape. And when he writes and reflects on some of the aspects of the manifesto, what we are asking of him is to tap into all aspects of his humanity, including ourselves. It's so important that we don't create politics as a stifling and a stumbling block for people to participate in the choices of everyday life. People say, you politicians. I say everyone is a politician. Because for as long as you've got a thinking brain, for as long as you have to make choices every single day, then you're a politician. The first thing that you're given when you're born is your name.
Yes.
That's probably one of the first political experiences that you have, because names are contentious. They bring lots of creativity, and people have to then agree to say, this is the name that we will give to Tebogo.
Sure.
And when they finally settle on that, that is the demonstration of politics at play. So if the very first political experience you have is when you are named, trust me, it carries on through your entire life. Whether you work at Hilaal TV, whether you work in a bank, whether you are a public servant, you have to make choices, and those choices matter. And that's the politics of the everyday experience that we are asking to come through in the manifesto.
That's, of course, the beauty of South Africa. You have a choice come the elections. After the break, I continue my conversation. We're going to be talking about the role of new political parties entering this year's elections, and of course, the importance they're going to have. And there's quite a lot of new political parties that are coming to the frame. So do stay tuned to Talking Point. I'll be back after this break. Welcome back to Talking Point. I'm in conversation with Tebogo Moalusi, who is the Gauteng convener for Rise Mzansi. Tebogo, tons of new political parties that are coming into the frame. I mean, I think I counted 10, but I think there may even be more than that, and it includes Rise Mzansi. The beauty of our democracy allows for it to happen. Are we in a space where there's too much, or is too much too good for all of us?
Sure. I think we are in a space of change.
Yes.
And change comes with uncertainty. Change comes with newness. I know that there's a saying that says, for the new to be born, the old must die. And I think we must look at this moment as a positive moment. Like you say, democracy, the democracy that people fought and died for enables for this moment to be true. And I think we must invite it because it starts to open the landscape of what is possible. You know, in any other aspect of society, whether you are in business, whether you are even in media, there's moments in time where change happens. And when that change happens, new entrants come in and they are tested against the headwinds of being in that space. But over time, there's a consolidation process. Those who are able to continue to offer value and sustain themselves based on the fundamentals that they were built on are those that can, stand the test of time. We would not be here if the space wasn't available for new political parties and new entities to be born. And so we are coming in as Rise Mzansi as a disruptor, as a challenger to look at the status quo and say, 30 years later, not yet Uhuru. We need change, and we need change to look different. It must be younger, it must be more energetic, it must represent a global outlook, it must be youthful in its energy. It must look at the world in a very different dimension of technology and interruption. And that's what we're seeing. I think, yes, there'll be new parties. Many will, I think, die over time. Some will convene and merge. Some will coalesce. But definitely what will happen is the political landscape will change. We are hoping that that change will only lead to a better South Africa for the residents and the citizens of the nation.
Tebogo, what we've seen, and I'm going to just cherry pick three new political parties because, I mean, they're the three that stand out that could potentially have a sense of disruption, and I put it in inverted commas. One is, of course, ACT, led by the former Secretary General of the ANC, Ace Magashule. We've got the new MK party, led by the former President Jacob Zuma. And, of course, we've got Change Starts Now, Roger Jardine's party. All three of them have a common denominator in that it's led by more elder men. Do you feel that Rise Mzansi with a more youthful approach, because Songezo still has that youthfulness in him, the way he speaks, the way he acts, he has that within him, and the makeup of your party seems to have a more youthful approach. Do you feel that that in itself can stand alone in attracting the youth, which are the core voters come this year's elections?
You know, one of the things that we pride ourselves on as Rise Mzansi is that we're not a breakaway. We are not a faction. We are born out of a necessity and need driven by purpose and vision. We don't have a chip on our shoulders. The only chip that we have on our shoulders is the fact that the South Africa we live in is in tatters and is in complete crisis. And we want to solve for that. With some of the parties that you've mentioned, many of them are really, chips of an old block, if you ask me. They represent what has already been. They've been tried and tested. They've had an opportunity to make the change and have failed to do so. So I don't think it's wonder that they, given a chance, are going to yield the same outcome. You can't do the same thing over and over again and expect a different outcome. So I think we play in a very different space. They may be particularly in an opposition politics space. We're an alternative. And we keep saying that because it's important to differentiate. We're not here to play musical chairs about old political, actors moving from one party to another. We are about regenerating an entirely new space of politics. It's not just about political party activity. It's about readjusting and renewing political culture in the country. And hence why, if you look at the team, if you look at the leaders, we've tried to attract people from different walks of life, people who don't even have a political experience, but we're balancing that with people with political experience. So whilst the youth are very important in the elections to come, we are very mindful that this is an intergenerational mission. There's so much value that our elders still have to offer. Because the tendency is to just throw out, those who are of kind of the older generation, but that's not the way to do it. I think there's immense energy and a lot of wisdom that comes with the contributions that they can make. But what we are asking for is a seat at the table. I think for far too long, those who are younger have had to wait their turn, be seen, be unheard, but continue to invest in a democracy that doesn't serve them. You just have to look at the statistics. Youth unemployment is at an all-time high. If you look at drug abuse and alcohol abuse, who does it affect the most? It affects young people. And so it's important that we solve for those who we need to prioritize. But at the same time, we should not forget about the middle-aged South African. We should not forget about the elderly, because they continue to be South Africans, number one, but key contributors to the broad body politic of the South African experience.
Tebogo, you brought up something very interesting, an alternative rather than in opposition, because the many people I speak to, and colleagues included, we see many of the opposition parties being, taking the anti-ANC rhetoric, for example. How do we unseat the ANC? How do we go ahead and make sure that they're not in power? Do you feel that with that alternative tag to your name, that you can convince the voter that, listen, we're not here to unseat the ANC, but we're here to potentially be somebody who can offer something different to what the other political parties hold?
It must be both. We must unseat the ANC because the crisis we face today is because of them, and that's a fact. So we can't run away from that. The second thing is we live in a constitutional democracy that has a limited scope for how many leaders and how many people can occupy the seats of parliament. And based simply of that, someone has to step out in order for someone to step in. And our view is that those who have failed to lead this country to prosperity must step aside, and the Rise Mzansis of this world must step in to offer an alternative. Where does the alternative come in? It comes in new ideas bringing new leaders, and new leaders bringing new ideas. You can't cultivate newness from an old space. We have seen this in many other spaces in society. In order to innovate, you need to be able to generate creativity. And we don't believe that the current establishment has got the level of creativity to get us out of the mess that we see. And that's what alternativism talks to. It says, how do we borrow from your life experience outside and make sure that it can be used in a government context? If you look at the way we've appointed our political principals in parliament, it's a very shallow pool. And no wonder we find ourselves in a leadership crisis that we see ourselves in. There are so many talented people who work in civil society, who work in business, who work in academia, who have not been considered. And therefore, we've set a very low bar for those who can lead and make the most important choices about what affects you and I on a daily basis. We say enough is enough. We say that we want new leaders to bring new ideas so that we can craft a future that is fundamentally different to what we are living in at the moment.
Tebogo, before we go to the break, I once had the ANC Youth League leader here, Colin Malachi, and one of the things he brought up is there needs to be a youth representative in Parliament. Now, I counter that by asking, do you feel that the current MPs, and I'm talking about from an ANC perspective, who are quite elderly, will allow that to happen? How important is it going to be that that National Assembly has a youth element to it? Because without that, they really can't speak to what the young of this country are going through at the moment.
When we started Rise Mzansi, the first thing we told ourselves is we will not have leagues. We're not going to create the idea that people like the youth, people like women, must find a small corner somewhere to go and discuss their issues and then come and present to us. And that is why, even in the National Leadership Collective of Rise Mzansi, the youth sit at the table as equals. Because it's important not to sideline young people and women and people living with disabilities and the LGBTQIA community as kind of a segment that must talk in the corners and therefore submit to the main body after they have made their conclusions. They must discuss at the table. And that's what we're advocating for. If we're saying that young people are the majority shareholders of Rise Mzansi or Mzansi Pty Limited, it is them that must be at the table, not on the sidelines. Age, gender, race, religious background, all of those things are context. They allow you to bring your story to the table so that you can advocate for a group of people who don't have a voice. And that is why the idea of having young people on the table is important. They see the world in a very different way. They're affected by the world in a different way. You know, the idea that the elderly must be continuously the parents who save young people from themselves must stop. We must start to see young people as contributors to society, those who have the power and the agency to change the way that we have shaped the country. If you look across the world and you start looking at how the world is starting to shape, from corporates to civil society to even governments, they are noticing and realizing that there is a youth dividend that can be accessed. And Africa and South Africa are behind in making sure that we can unlock that youth dividend. But that dividend is also about women. It's about people of color, black people in the broad definition. And it's important that we can move those people closer to the front of the table in all areas of society.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Tebogo Moalusi. We're going to be discussing the issues facing South Africa. There are many of it. And what is the way forward in trying to resolve it short-term and long-term? Do stay tuned to Talking Point. Welcome back to Talking Point. I'm in conversation with Rise Mzansi's Gauteng convener, Tebogo Moalusi. Tebogo, I remember the last time when you came and visited us, we spoke about leadership and the importance of leadership from a country perspective. This is going to be another litmus test for the rest of the leadership within the country. And I'm not pinpointing President Cyril Ramaphosa himself. I'm pinpointing the leaders, from, of course, the premiers to the mayors to the councillors. They have their work cut out for them, don't they? And if you're not seeing that leadership occurring, the citizens and the residents are going to lose hope, won't they?
They already have. And that is reflected in the number of people who don't turn out to vote. We've got over 40 million people who are eligible to vote. We've got around 28 million who are registered and eligible to vote but did not show up at the polls in 2021. And that's why we talk about the alternative, because it's not about, trying to change the minds of just those who have already voted or are voting. It's about unlocking the power of those who are looking at the environment and saying, I don't want to be involved in this mess. And so democracy is failing because too many South Africans are not participating in the politics of the day. And that's because they look around and they don't see the power of their vote, and they don't see the power of how to hold the leadership accountable. Certainly, we have a leadership crisis. More fundamentally, we have a political leadership crisis, because it's at that level that our leaders are supposed to prioritize, are supposed to create plans, and are supposed to monitor the performance of those plans over time. You look at this current government, they set out the National Development Plan, which was their plan. Nobody held a gun to their head and said, do this thing. They've got some of the best brains in the country and internationally to craft a vision for 2030. If you look at the report that then came out in terms of how far the political leadership has come in achieving those goals, they have failed dismally. Now, you and I are employed and we've worked in organizations where performance is important. Yes. If you underperform for over 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and now 30 years, what do you think should happen? You should have been fired a long time ago. It's an interesting dynamic in politics that we keep leaders in place even though they have demonstrated the inability to deliver against the plans that they have put on the table. Economic output, economic growth, jobs, crime, drugs, housing, access to water, electricity. You choose them. We are underperforming in almost all the key indicators that would define any quality leadership in a political context. And that trickles all the way up and down. And that's because we don't have a compelling vision. If I ask any South African walking on the street, what do you think the vision for South Africa is? I don't think you'll get a single answer. But if you go to other countries, there's clarity of purpose, there's clarity of vision. What are the set of values that govern South Africans today? You and I, we can make decisions however we feel. And that's why we've got so much conflict, because we're not governed by a set of values that say, even though we may operate in different contexts, the ideals that govern our behavior should be similar. And as Rise Mzansi, we have said, justice, freedom, integrity, solidarity are absolutely crucial to how people look at the world, so that when you make decisions in your family, in your community, and in your workplace, hopefully we can make similar decisions so that it's the average that raises the country at a whole. But I think the last point is we have to activate the leaders in ourselves. For far too long, we have waited for a Messiah to come and save us. And I think the current president must be the last example of that. We thought that the current president would come and would be, the super Saiyan, super president that would help us from load shedding, from hunger. And he has not. As a matter of fact, he's probably one of the worst performing presidents that we've had if you look at the numbers. So it's in us. We are the ones that we've been waiting for. It's about every single person taking control of their destiny, first by voting, and then secondly by being an active citizen and participating in the affairs of this country.
Tebogo, you brought up load shedding, and I think every South African understands the extent of the energy crisis. Of course, you've got the National Energy Plan, and you've got various works with regards to the movement from fossil fuels into renewables. Should Rise Mzansi have an influence in policy making from a governmental level, from a national level? How do we solve this energy crisis, which really is hurting the fabric of our economy?
It has traumatized us. The trauma of load shedding is something that we are still going to have to deal with, because people have lost lives. Yes. People have lost livelihoods. There's businesses that have closed.
I mean, the Sowetan, I think it was 2022, where they had that front page.
That list,
yes, yeah.
So those businesses, you don't get to recover them. They are gone, and they are gone forever. To the graveyard where dreams die. And that is load shedding. So we mustn't see load shedding simply as not having lights. Load shedding has affected our ability to function as a nation, and not only function, but to prosper. And we've lost years because of that. But to your question about, what is the kind of proposition around energy, I don't want to get ahead, because obviously we've got our manifesto coming soon. But there's a number of fundamentals that I think are important. The first is, I think we must think about going back to basics and understanding why we are in this problem to start off with, and assess the problems and really, really attack the problems in the most pragmatic way possible. The second is it's only recent that the ESCOM permanent CEO has been put in place. But before then, we had a vacancy. We had an acting CFO. The board was not settled. And the same is apparent in the likes of a Transnet and a Prasa. Most parastatals have got people in acting positions. And therefore, there's no capability to make decisions, to build compelling visions, and to take people along so that they can perform at the highest level. So we still have got leadership and management capability and competency problems in these state-owned enterprises, including ESCOM. The third is we must deal with the issue of the crime against the people.
Yes.
That is corruption. That's how we term corruption. It is a crime against the people. Because it looks like you're stealing money, but what you're stealing is much more pervasive and much more deep than the money on the table. It is livelihoods, it is even hope. You know, when you steal someone's hope, there must be a high price to pay when you do that, because that cannot have a price tag on it. And so we must deal with corruption in the public sector, but we must also deal with it in the private sector. There was a recent article that came out around SAP and them having to pay back 4 billion rands in fines. Now, SAP didn't take people on golfing tours and pay themselves. They paid other people who are public servants in various departments, including ESCOM. Now we must be able to be critical about both sides of the divide, because there's business was implicated in this, and there's the public sector officials who are implicated. So we must deal with it decisively. And I spoke about values earlier on. If we had values that determine how we are supposed to behave, integrity being one of them, we would make sure that anybody who behaves in that manner gets a very harsh sentence, because they know they are taking us backwards in the most violent way. And so those are some of the things that we think must be brought to the table in dealing with the fundamentals of state-owned enterprises. We've got talent all over the place. We've got engineers. We've got people running complex organizations and businesses in the mining sector and the engineering faculties. We don't have a talent problem. We have a leadership problem. And once we can solve for that, then we can start making sure that the right people are in the right places, making the right decisions that affect you and I.
How much of a role does the private sector have to play for South Africa? I ask this because there's been talks about privatization of SOEs. And I mean, when you look at the preamble of our constitution and the Bill of Rights, you know, SOEs is meant to be state-owned. But how much of an influence now does, you know, the private sector get involved? Or do we see the private sector as still that small contributor to the South African economy? Where is the balance with regards to that?
The private sector, absolutely crucial. They are powerful, they're influential. We live in a political economy, which means that business cannot be separated from the politics of the day. And so as a power block, as an influential block, they have to constantly be engaged. We must hold them accountable to the high standard that we expect everybody to participate in. You know, issues of transformation. When certain businesses flout transformation laws and regulations and make provision for it in their income statements because they just want to pay the fine, that should be something that we don't advocate for in this country. Because transformation for us is about justice and is about freedom. And if we subscribe to those values as a people, anybody who moves us away from that needle and from that center should be held to account. So private sector, absolutely important and a key part of the citizenry. You know, we've got corporate citizens, we've got civil society citizens, and we've got individual citizens like you and I. And all of us must be held to that same high standard, including those in the public sector and politicians.
After the break, I wrap up my conversation with Tebogo Moalusi. We're going to be talking, it's a congested political space. What does Rise Mzansi have to offer South Africans as a party which they can go to the polls and make their mark on? To stay tuned to Talking Point, we'll be back after this break. Welcome back. I'm wrapping up my conversation with Tebogo Moalusi from Rise Mzansi. He, of course, now serves as the Gauteng convener. Tebogo, congested political space, we spoke about it earlier on, so many parties to choose from. How does Rise Mzansi approach? I mean, of course, you got the manifesto launch happening this weekend, but moving closer to those election dates, and I'm sure that there's going to be rallies or something very similar to that, where you speak to many of your members and those who are going to support the party. But how do you now speak to the people saying, look, we're in a congested space, but like you mentioned, we stand out as the alternative, and we really can be someone who we can make an impact on with regards to the various communities that you wish to serve?
The 3 C's. We represent a politics of care. Too many political parties don't care. They are mostly interested in power and getting as close to the purse as possible in order to fulfill their own lifestyle dreams. And you'll see it based on just the choices they make. So politics of care. The politics of courage. We have to make bold decisions. And some people are going to make sacrifices in the short term. The thing about political choice is that not everybody wins at the same time. And so we have to look at the set of problems. We have to look at the limited resources that we have. And we as a country must decide, who do we serve first? And that's something that is about solidarity. It's about looking at your life and saying, I'm willing to wait because there are others who require a lot more of an immediate and urgent response from a government point of view. And those are the compromises that we're going to have to make and the courage that we're going to have to have. The third one is competence, the politics of competence. If you look at the caliber of the leadership of Rise Mzansi and those who will come through our public candidates nomination process, which is currently running, you'll see these are highly capable individuals who have served and delivered success and prosperity in many of the spaces that they have worked in, myself included. I came from a world of business, and if you look at my own track record, it speaks for itself. But I'm a representation of many other people that I bring along with me that I would like them to contribute so that we can really be the rising tide that lifts all ships. So that's the type of politics that we're bringing to the table. But we bring something else to the table, and that is making politics accessible again. When we looked at our policy framework, even when you read the manifesto as it comes out, you'll see the cascading effect, that politics starts at the individual. It starts with you. When you wake up in the morning, you have a set of choices to make and an environment in which to make those choices. And therefore, who you choose and vote for is determined by your own well-being as an individual. But we also belong to families. As a parent, one of the things that defines your political choices is how are your children going to inherit this country? What's going to be the conditions of this country when your children then get to lead and become part of the economic participants? And so we want to build a politics that responds to the family. Families are located in communities. We need to make sure that communities are safe, that they are connected, that they are functional, that they are the representative of the kind of country that we want to be able to build as a collective. And so that's what we talk about when we talk about accessibility of politics. The language and the style and the convening of people must be broad and it must be inviting so that people feel like they're being heard and being seen and that their contributions matter. Obviously, it's important that the complexity also increases over the spectrum. So we must deal with things of the economy. We talk about making sure that we build an inclusive growth and sustainable economy, which we unpack in our manifesto of how we want to plan to do that. The economy is fundamental. As an able adult, what I want to be able to do is wake up, go and make a contribution through meaningful and dignified work, come back home and feel like I've made a contribution to the country and have extracted and built value for myself in a wealth creation space. Many other things, climate is important. Yes. You cannot build a successful nation in the context of a dying world. We can't allow for a situation where we are seeing so much of what climate change is doing to our world. You can see what's happening in KZN, yes. The rains that are affecting people. And sometimes when we talk about climate change, it seems like it's these big concepts, but things like insurance. If you live in KZN today and you can't afford insurance, these rains and floods that have swept your house away and your belongings means that you've lost generational wealth. Definitely. In African families and South African families, Our homes are a collective of generations of assets. Your headboard was bought by your grandmother, your TV was bought by your uncle, the chest of drawers was contributed by your grandfather. And when that gets swept away in the context of a country where we've got such huge unemployment, how do we expect families to recover? So climate change is not just an environmental conversation. It's an economic conversation. It's a family conversation. It integrates and interacts with all aspects of South African life. And that's how we are looking at politics. It's about simplicity, but it's also about pragmatism and moving quickly to solve the most urgent issues for those who are harmed the most by the status quo.
Tebogo, of course, being the Gauteng convener, you heavily invested in this province, and we know what Gauteng means in terms of the economy of South Africa. If I were to ask Rise Mzansi, what is the most important priority with regards to Gauteng? And, obviously these elections are not just national, but it's also provincial. Whereas Rise Mzansi see themselves contesting the space in the Gauteng province.
Gauteng, it's in the name. Gauteng is the place of gold, the place of prosperity. People come to Gauteng for the opportunity to participate in economic opportunity. Sure. That's what grounds us. We are the city of hustlers. If you look at this backdrop, this is what it means.
Yeah, sure.
It's a buzzing city of energy, of commerce, and it's when people are able to access that working economy that they're able to build livelihoods and a social life for themselves. And so, as Rise Mzansi, our commitment when we step into government is to restore the essence of Gauteng, the essence of a province that is about prosperity, about economic growth, about the creation of jobs so that people can earn and build wealth for themselves and for their families. And once we can do that, we can then start to impact all the other social aspects. But you can't build an economy when you've got failing infrastructure, when you've got incapable public servants, when you've got crime, when you've got drugs, and when you've got hunger. And so it must be kind of a dual process of saying, we're going to make sure that we get the best to lead so that Gauteng can be strong, but we're also going to make sure that people are looked after so that they can, look after their families and themselves at the same time.
Tebogo, one final question. I know when we invited you here last year in May, you said 2024 is our 1994. We're in the year. I know a lot of other political parties have adopted a very similar slogan to what you said. Those born the year, obviously, democracy was adopted, they would be 30 this year. My sister, of course, she was born in 1994. She's 30 this year. And she has a baby daughter who's 2 years old. And we were talking about this, and she said, I don't want it to come a time where, when she turns 30 and South Africa is sitting in a very similar situation. A change has to happen because as a country, we enjoy all the fruits of success, be it, rugby, the sports. South Africans want to see change, but they don't want to wait for a long time.
Yeah.
And that's important, isn't it? That the change, even though it's gradual, there is something heading in the right direction.
The change starts with the vote, and that's this year.
Yeah.
So we don't have to wait too long. It changes at the ballot box whenever the elections get promulgated. That's the first change that gets to happen. But before that change at the ballot box happens, it's the change of the mind.
Yeah.
It's the change of what am I committing myself to? It's not just going and putting an X on a ballot box.
Yeah, sure.
It's about saying, sheesh, I am now the adult in the room. At some point our parents looked after us and we were at the mercy of what they brought to the home. We are now the adults in the room. Your sister is now the adult in the room. She must take full responsibility for the world that we live in and the world that her children will inherit. And that's the point, is whenever we decide to step out of the realm of politics, we must always ask ourselves, what is the cost of doing nothing?
Sure.
And if we sustain the status quo, which is a declining trend across all spectrums, then the country that your sister's child is going to inherit is going to be worse than the country she lives in today. And unfortunately, the reality is people like you and I who have the privilege of work, we've had to build a parallel state.
Sure.
And that parallel state is called private. It's private healthcare, private education, private security. We pay our taxes and then we still have to pay for these services. That's the cost of doing nothing.
Yes.
In an ideal South African environment, you pay your taxes, and then you've got this money to self-actualize. You've got that money to save, to invest, to enjoy time with your family, to create space, and enjoy the most important factor of life, which is time.
Yes.
But we can't do that because we're constantly working our knuckles down, trying to make ends meet. We call it the working poor. People are employed, but month on month, they have to borrow money just to make it to the end of that month. And that's the cost of doing nothing, quantitatively.
Yeah. Tebogo, it's been an absolute pleasure hosting you here. Great conversation and all the best ahead of the Manifesto launch happening this weekend. And we hope to have Rise Mzansi again back here closer to the elections.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us, and looking forward to taking you through our manifesto after we've launched it. I think it will excite many South Africans about the vision that we have for this beautiful country.
Definitely. Thank you again, Tebogo. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
That's Tebogo Moalusi. He's the Rise Mzansi Gauteng convener. That's all we have for you here on Talking Point. We'll see you again, same time, same place next week. From myself, Fahraaz Patel, and the rest of the team here in Johannesburg. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.